Welcome back to The Explainer. So today we're diving headfirst into a really fascinating philosophical text by Zhe Feng. It completely challenges our fundamental understanding of reality, which is always fun, right? It essentially asks us to look way beyond the physical world and examine the unseen forces that actually shape our existence. We're going to explore the nuts and bolts of perception, dive into the hidden toxins that cloud our judgment, and look at a totally unique roadmap to spiritual clarity. Let's get right into it.
So think about this. Are you only seeing half the universe? It's a pretty wild question to kick things off. I mean, we go through our daily lives relying so heavily on our everyday senses, right? We completely trust what we can see, touch, and hear. But the text we're examining today poses a pretty radical idea. What if these biological tools of ours are only showing us a tiny fraction of the actual objective world? What if relying solely on them means we are literally missing the bigger picture?
The core premise here is that a fault with literally any perception system can make us completely incapable of understanding the real situation around us in the universe. The author actually argues that human consciousness is kind of like a super complex machine. If even a single gear or, perception system is faulty, blind, or just closed off, our consciousness just cannot reflect objective reality. It's like trying to put together a giant puzzle, but you're missing half the pieces. We're just left operating on totally incomplete data.
Okay, so to understand what data we might actually be missing, we first need to define the systems themselves. The text outlines this explicit framework for how humans perceive and understand the world, as well as matter that totally transcends time and space. The author breaks these down into what he calls the 6 perception systems.
Now, the leap this framework takes here is super interesting. The first 5 senses, totally familiar to us. We've got vision, hearing, smell, taste, and touch. We all learned about these back in kindergarten, right? But then, it dramatically adds a 6th, equally vital sense, spiritual perception. And according to the text, this isn't just some poetic metaphor. It is a literal, functional perception system that's just as critical to our understanding of the universe as our physical eyesight.
So there's this really direct parallel drawn between our physical and our spiritual faculties. If our physical eyes are blindfolded, obviously, we lose our vision of the material world. We all get that. But if our souls are hoodwinked, we suffer what the author calls spiritual blindness. In this state, we apparently can't distinguish between right and wrong, or truth and falsehood. Even wilder, we become completely blind to the non-material world and, as the text explicitly states, we can no longer see the greatest creator.
So what exactly is this 6th sense? Well, the text defines spiritual perception not as some rare gift for a chosen few, but as an innate program equipped in absolutely everyone. Literally, we all have it. The crucial difference, though, lies in its sensitivity. The author actually claims that the entire spectrum of human spiritual evolution, going from an ignorant person to a mortal, a sage, all the way up to a celestial being, is determined primarily by how sensitive this exact perception is. If it's stunted, you're more ignorant. If it's highly sensitive, you are closer to being a celestial being. Naturally, you're probably wondering, okay, so how do we upgrade the sensitivity? How do we actually open these spiritual eyes? Well, the author lays out a very specific 2-step roadmap for self-cultivation. Step 1 involves consulting the teachings of Jesus Christ and Buddha. The text literally calls this the talisman to open your eyes, alongside specific written chapters like The Greatest Creator and Unconventional Thinking. Step 2, though, gets a bit more metaphorical. It requires restoring the perception by wiping the mirror.
This whole concept is captured through a really simple metaphor. The text says spiritual perception is itself like a mirror. We don't actually need to add anything to it, we just need to be diligent in wiping the dust off it. It's a great analogy, right? It implies that our spiritual perception is already completely perfect underneath all the grime. It's just dirty. We don't need to go out and acquire some fancy new skill, we just need to clean the lens we already have. But that brings us to the central conflict of the text. What on earth is this dust?
Well, the text definitely doesn't leave us guessing. It clearly identifies the dust that's hoodwinking our spiritual eyes. Drawing straight from Buddhist teachings, the author explains that when our 6 senses are not clean, it means we actually have evil in our minds. And this evil prevents us from seeing, hearing, and contemplating the things we should, and instead makes us focus on what we really shouldn't. This entire state of uncleanliness is caused by what the text calls the 5 toxins. So what are these 5 toxins? They are greed, anger, infatuation, slander, and suspicion. Now, the author clarifies something important here. Some cultural idioms misunderstand toxins to mean physical vices, like gambling or stealing.
But the true deep-rooted toxins that dirty up our spiritual mirror are actually these 5 internal psychological states. These are the traditional specks of dust we're supposed to be constantly wiping away.
But here is where the author, Zhu Feng, really pivots. He adds his own core philosophical contribution to this ancient framework. To those traditional 5 toxins, he emphatically adds a 6th. And this specific toxin? It forms the absolute crux of his entire argument. That 6th toxin is jealousy.
The text actually gives us a really precise definition for this. It describes jealousy as the inexplicable, indignant resentment and feeling of taboo arising from within as a result of one's failure to obtain what others are in possession of. So it's this incredibly internal, deeply destructive reaction to someone else's state of being or what they happen to have.
And why is this one considered uniquely toxic? Well, because the consequences are absolutely devastating. The text argues that jealousy leads to the actual distortion and abnormality of the soul. It creates trouble out of thin air, destroys peace, manufactures friction, and even literal wars. It makes people completely ferocious and insensible. But most importantly for our whole framework today, the author states that jealousy directly hoodwinks our spiritual eyes. It completely distorts the true nature of reality and leads people straight toward evil.
To really drive this point home, the author shifts gears. He goes from abstract philosophy to highly specific personal experiences. He actually uses his own life, and specifically the reactions he gets from the public, as the primary case study for just how destructive this 6th toxin really is. Now, the text presents some remarkably sweeping claims made by the author. Zhu Feng states that he is the person with the highest wisdom, the greatest man in history, the messenger of the greatest creator, and even the incarnation of Jesus Christ and Buddha. Now remember, in this explainer, we are just neutrally examining the text, so the point isn't to debate these assertions, right? We're just looking at how he uses them in his argument. He states that simply making these claims turns him into a massive target for intense public hostility and anger. This builds into a really fascinating psychological analysis. The catalyst here is his claim of greatness, along with, and he specifically notes this in the text, the fact that many women are attracted to him, which he views as something sincere and beautiful. The public's reaction to all this? Simmering indignation, hostility, and essentially making themselves his enemy. So, the author's thesis is that this negative reaction is entirely due to the toxin of jealousy. He argues that because of jealousy, people listen with a heart of evil, allowing their spiritual eyes to be completely blinded. Basically, they miss the whole forest because of a few trees. So if the world is just totally overcast with these dark clouds of jealousy, as the text laments, what's the way out? Well, the author concludes by offering a path to clarity through dedicated self-cultivation. Specifically, he points to a structured process, which he calls the building of Life Shiny Yuan, as the ultimate method for self-refining. It's the way to clear away all that spiritual dust.
The absolute rigor of that path is captured perfectly in one of his quotes. He writes, "I have created a lot of steep mountains and tortuous rivers. If you have swum across these rivers and scaled these mountains, you will see beautiful flowers in front of you." The text essentially views these philosophical and psychological challenges, overcoming our base reactions and wiping away toxins like jealousy, as a massive obstacle course. If you cannot scale these mountains, the text warns, you're just going to stay right where you are, trapped in a cycle of transmigration, never getting to see the picturesque scenery that lies beyond.
And that leaves us with a very direct challenge posed by the text itself. Will you let jealousy hoodwink your spiritual eyes? The author really pleads with the reader to diligently wipe the dust off their inner mirror. Because according to this entire fascinating framework, if you allow jealousy to fester, your spiritual eyes are just going to remain closed. You will forever be walking through the universe totally blindfolded. It's honestly a pretty striking perspective on how our internal emotional state might literally dictate the reality we're even capable of perceiving. Definitely something to think about the next time you feel that inexplicable resentment bubbling up inside. Thanks so much for joining me for this explanator, and we'll see you next time.